Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the Caring for a Veteran with ALS and Anticipating Their Future Needs webinar. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. I will now turn the call over to Brian Vidal to begin. Please go ahead.
Thank you and welcome. Greetings on behalf of Easter Seals as we host the latest webinar in our Military and Veteran Caregiver webinar series titled Caring for a Veteran with ALS and Anticipating Their Future Needs. We are pleased to partner in this effort as a proud member of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation's National Coalition for Military Caregivers. First, let me begin by thanking our operator, Maria, for her support. Thank you, Maria. And now some specific details related to today's webinar. The phone lines will be muted throughout today's webinar. Should you have any questions or concerns, please use the online chat feature of our webinar software on the left-hand side of your screen and send an email to militarycaregiver@easterseals.com. If you experience any issues accessing the Blackboard webinar platform, please send an email to that same email address. Once again, militarycaregiver@easterseals.com, and staff will send you a copy of today's slides so that you can continue to listen in and follow along. We will address questions once our speakers conclude their presentation. Please note that this session is being recorded. Transcripts of the recording, along with copies of handouts and other valuable resources, will be posted to easterseals.com/care webinar. Also available on that webpage are the archived recordings of all our previous webinars. We're pleased to provide live captioning for today's webinar. To access that feature, type in Control F8 into your keyboard. Now I'd like to review our agenda. I'll begin by introducing Mary Hahn Ward, an Elizabeth Dole Foundation Fellow from the state of North Carolina. I'll then introduce today's host, Elisa Brownlee. Elisa will then share with us her knowledge on caring for a veteran with ALS and anticipating their future needs. Immediately following the presentation, we've reserved time for all our speakers to respond to online or email questions. We're also fortunate to have Dr. Michelle Stefanelli, representing the VA Caregiver Support Program, joining us as an additional resource expert, and we have the pleasure of having Dr. Elise Kaplan, the Deputy Director of the VA Caregiver Program, joining us today. Today's webinar is supported by an incredible group of organizations. They include Atlas Research, Caregiver Action Network, Family Caregiver Alliance, the National Alliance for Caregiving, Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving, the USO, and the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. And now I'd like to turn things over to Mary Ward. Mary is an Elizabeth Dole Foundation Fellow of Wilmington, North Carolina. She holds a master's degree in healthcare management and policy and a master's in public administration. Tom, Mary's husband, served as a United States Marine during the 1970s. In 1993, he contracted encephalitis and suffered cognitive difficulties. Then in 2010, he was diagnosed with ALS, which veterans develop at a higher rate than the general population. Mary hopes that her time as a Dole Fellow can help her encourage, support, and inspire other caregivers. Having worked in the healthcare management field, Mary decided to switch careers and began serving in education. She's now a high school social studies teacher and finds herself teaching online in order to accommodate the care of her husband. Mary and two other caregivers, joined by their veteran husbands, recently testified on Wednesday, June 14th, before the Senate Special Committee on Aging and advocated for the support of military caregivers. She urged lawmakers to pass proposed legislation that would expand eligibility for the Department of Veteran Affairs caregiver program to veterans of all generations, not just the post-9/11 generation. Mary, please take it away.
Thank you, Brian. So I thought we could go to the slide for road to diagnosis. If you could advance me to that one, that would be great. Okay. Next one? Okay, great. That's a good one. All right, so I thought I was going to talk a little bit about the road to diagnosis for us. It's different for everybody who has ALS. It took us a long time. Tom is in it's a category called slowly progressive, so it probably took a little bit longer than for those who advance more quickly. It seemed like it was going to take forever, and we kind of felt like it would be ALS, but you never really know, and you're always kind of hoping that it's something else. It's a scary time in anybody's life when you're trying to figure out what it is that's wrong with them. He had a lot of weakness on his left side and his left hand and seemed to be losing strength and a lot of gesticulations, which a good way to think about that is a lot of twitching, but kind of deep twitching, and you can see it under his arms. Next slide, please. So Tom received his diagnosis on June 21st, so that was yesterday for him. He's 7 years into his diagnosis. I don't think anybody knows why somebody lives longer with ALS than somebody else. Typically, what we know about ALS is people live 3 to 5 years from diagnosis, so he's exceeded that time frame. It was the day after our 30th wedding anniversary, and that was really hard. We were really surprised, but not surprised when he got his diagnosis. We kind of expected it, but at the same time, I think when you hear those words, and it took Tom's doctor, finally the last doctor we saw, we had seen many of them, 2 minutes, and he said ALS. And it's sort of like, it is like that lightning strike, like, oh no, now we really have it confirmed, and that's really hard. There's a lot of thinking that you have to do about that, and your heart just hurts. Next slide. So Brian talked a little bit about the connection. September 2008, the Veterans Administration made ALS a presumptive condition. They had done a thorough study that looked back over time, and they saw that more veterans get ALS than non-veterans. And so Tom, when he was diagnosed in 2010, then we were able to get him service connected. And Tom went through the PVA, the Paralyzed Veterans of America, very successfully, very quickly. They handled his claim, they handled all of his paperwork. I probably am the biggest cheerleader of the PVA than you can imagine. It's so great to just have somebody take that from you and say, okay, we have this, we're going to handle it. And to this day, the PVA walks alongside of me. I recently needed something from some assistance with something for Tom, and the PVA stepped right in to help me out. It's such a breath of fresh air to have that kind of help. So I actually encourage anybody who's listening today who's veteran or service connected to reach out to a VSO, especially that's a veteran service officer, especially the PVA. I just can't say enough good things about them. Okay, so next slide, please. So struggles with the VA. So for the most part, the VA connection is so great for this devastating disease because we really get everything that we need to care for Tom, including health insurance, or I have CHAMP VA, which makes it very possible for me to stay home and teach online where I don't get benefits. I don't have health benefits, but I get them through CHAMP VA, and that's great. But when it comes to Tom's care, we get most everything that we need from the VA without a struggle, but it's those times when we struggle, and a good example of that would be his breathing mask. That seems to be a struggle sometimes, and when the breathing mask starts to break down because of he perspires a lot during the night, and he has a lot of saliva at night. So when that breaks down, then it gets noisy for me, and then I'm not sleeping as well, and he's not sleeping as well, and that sometimes is a struggle. And then that gets very frustrating. So it kind of gets in the way, but most of the time the VA is really good for him. But again, I would say, like, if you have struggles with the VA, like when I've had them, I start making phone calls. And that's like the best thing you can do. Like to get somebody on the phone is the best approach. Patient advocates sometimes help. I've called social work at the VA. My husband Tommy uses the Durham VA, and we also use the clinic here in Wilmington. So it's just a little complicated because it's two VAs. But I have found out that when I've reached out personally, people listen and they try to help us. So next slide, please. So, how do we live with ALS? I like the idea of saying that we live with ALS. We had a big house in Durham, North Carolina. I've been teaching in the classroom. And 2 years into his diagnosis, we knew it was an upstairs, downstairs, and it was going to be tough for us to stay in that house as the disease progressed. And when in 2012, so now when people are diagnosed, veterans are diagnosed with ALS, they're automatically 100%, and their dependents will qualify for CHAMP-VA. But at the time when Tom was diagnosed, he was at 30% rating, and then you had to keep going back to increased rating. So we had kind of that 2-year period where we weren't really sure how we were going to handle all of this going forward, the disease going forward. And when I was able to get the CHAMP-VA, I worked hard to get a teaching job online, and we decided to move to the beach. Tom and I grew up on Long Island, and we absolutely adore the beach. And it's been a really good move for us. It's been a really good place for us. We try to get out a lot to the beach, even if we just sit in the car and we look at the water in the winter time. Or Tom loves to paint too, oil painting, and he often goes down there. And he does painting down there. And so we try to live every day as well as we can. And living by the beach has definitely improved our outlook. The next slide, please. So taking care of Tom. So his activities of daily living has increased more recently. And that's typical with ALS that we find that. He no longer drives, and that's a photograph of him backing out of the van with Maddie, his service dog. So he no longer drives. So that's a big responsibility for me to make sure that he can do the things he wants to do. That's a huge loss of independence when you no longer drive. So I do all the food shopping. I do all the meal preparation. He drops things. So we've moved from regular dishes to plastic dishes, which, by the way, I heard Pier 1 has really good plastic dishes. So I'm going to go over and check that out and make them a little prettier for us. He can still feed himself, but it takes time for him to feed himself. His hands are a little shaky. I have to cut his food. I give him a bath every day. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the things that Elisa has on her slides, because we just started using the bigger bath chair, and I've struggled getting it. I don't struggle getting it down, but I struggle getting it up. So I'm interested to see if there's other ways for me to do that. I have to help him get dressed. He almost can't use his left hand at all, and his right hand is really weakening. So he definitely needs more help with those things. He needs help with getting his breathing mask on at night. I don't have to brush his teeth yet, but I think that's coming. So I think we're going to practice that a little bit. But we have the ability to do that, so I think that's great that we could do a little bit of practice before the need is actually there. Next slide, please. So he moves, as we know with ALS, he moves towards more dependence and independence, and we try to handle that pretty good, as good as we can. It can be, like I said, it can be frustrating for him. Not driving is huge for him. Sometimes if he wants to go over to Home Depot, and he needs stuff, I'll go and sit in the car and bring my iPad and just let him go. And actually, I keep the service dog with me too sometimes when we go to Home Depot, just so he can go out and be by himself. Having Maddie as a service dog is great for him. She brings things to him. If he drops something, she'll pick it up for him. I can give something to her and she'll take it to him. She can open the refrigerator and close the refrigerator. That's probably her favorite thing that she does. She loves slamming the refrigerator. But sometimes she gets a lot of attention. So it's nice sometimes that I can let him go out by himself, like to Home Depot or Lowe's, and sort of be anonymous. So we try to do that on occasion. This is a photo of our family. Our son is a drill sergeant now. He's been in the Army for 14 years. Our daughter is a second grade teacher. And this is very rare for us to all be together. So I like being able to share that. Our kids handle the disease really well, but they struggle with it, as you can imagine. He's really their hero in life. They're crazy about their dad. So I think they have sadness that they don't often share with us, but we know it's there. The next slide, please. And so, anticipatory grief. So I didn't really know anything about anticipatory grief. I sort of stumbled upon it, probably somewhere in my reading this with the ALS. I tried to read a lot about it and learn from other people who are dealing with the disease. I don't think I've conquered it. I'm not sure anybody can really conquer it because it's anticipatory. He's just, Tom is just everything to me. We've been like 37 years. We met, and when we met, he proposed 30 days later. Like, it was crazy. And we got married a year later, and I was 20 years old when we got married. I can't even imagine the future without him. And I realize we all have to do that at some point in our life. But as I see ALS sort of eat away at his body, it's hard. I have a lot of grief with that at times. And sometimes I'm really good with it, and sometimes I'm not. It kind of sneaks up on me sometimes when I least expect it. Next slide, please. Oh, and I guess that's it. So let me move on to Alisa. I'm going to mute myself now.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank everyone for this opportunity to speak about anticipating future needs for people with ALS. This presentation specifically focuses on durable medical equipment and communication devices, things that I'm asked for all the time. I have been fortunate enough to be with the ALS Association for almost 22 years now, and I have experienced clinics at Pennsylvania Hospital, Jefferson. I've also gone to the Veterans Administration Clinic, and a lot of caregivers and people with ALS would like to think about what their future needs would look like. So I have crafted this presentation about talking about future needs. As I'm sure almost everyone on the phone knows, ALS progresses differently with every individual. So what I'm speaking about and showing you might never be needed for you as a person with ALS or you as a loved one caring for someone with ALS. We simply do not know how the disease will progress. I've been fortunate to work for the Greater Philadelphia chapter for the past 21 and a half years and for the national office for the past 8 years. And I would encourage anyone who has a family member, a friend diagnosed with ALS to reach out to your local ALS chapter. You can find that through the National ALS Association, which is alsa.org. That's also at the very tail end of my PowerPoint. The National ALS Association obviously covers the entire United States, and then we have local chapters. And chapters, for example, even though I'm working for the Greater Philadelphia chapter, we cover 3 states. So almost every state has chapter representation. Every chapter offers different services. One of the services we do offer are Certified Center Treatment of Excellence, and we do have a significant number of people who not only go to the VA for care, but then they'll go to a specific ALS clinic. Because at the certified centers, the ALS clinics, it is a multidisciplinary team. So what that means is that you will have almost 13 different professions. So neurology, nursing, social work, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. So you have all these professionals in one clinic visit. So it's sort of one-stop shopping for someone with ALS. So I would, again, encourage you to reach out to your local chapter, see what services they offer, and see if there's a certified clinic around you. So I just want to give you an overview of ALS. Probably everyone on the phone knows this, but again, anticipating future needs means understanding the disease and the impact that it has on somebody's body. So obviously ALS is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, known as Lou Gehrig's disease. The most basic explanation that people can give is that the motor neurons between the brain and the spinal cord stop firing. So every muscle in the body except involuntary muscles are affected by ALS. So your arms and your hands, your legs, your speech, your swallowing, etc. The diaphragm muscle, which is the muscle underneath the lungs, that's what helps us breathe. That's what inevitably leads to death in ALS. So it's respiratory failure that causes the death in ALS. And so we try to relieve that discomfort from difficulty breathing through machines like BiPAP or Trilogy, non-invasive ventilation that can help somebody breathe a little easier. There is a cognitive impairment with ALS. 50% of people diagnosed with ALS will have some form of cognitive impairment, but that can be mild to severe. We simply do not know. But the cognitive impairment is called FTD, which means frontal temporal dementia. And ALS cognitive impairment is characterized by personality changes. You'll hear a spouse say, "This is not the person I married." Behavioral disturbances, acting out sexually, lack of empathy. Your person with ALS all of a sudden has no insight about how their disease is impacting the rest of the family. And they don't care. But they used to care, is what our caregivers will say. Problems with judgment. We have people who recklessly spend money and they don't tell anyone. They open up lines of credit. They'll drain bank accounts. And unfortunately, the spouse or the children or the rest of the family have no idea. They just didn't know. And then we do see some people with FTD have what's called primary progressive aphasia, which is also called PPA. What that means is that it's an aphasia like what would happen with a brain injury or a stroke. So it is a neurodegenerative disease that impacts the language part of the brain. So people with progressive primary aphasia will have language recall difficulties. They'll be searching for a word and they can't find it. So again, similar to stroke or a brain injury. The cognitive impairment is important to realize for future planning and for future needs. The cognitive impairment is focused on the frontal lobe, which is the decision-making part of your brain. So not only you have lack of empathy, lack of insight, but certain people with FTD simply can't make a decision. A caregiver will say, "Do you want a feeding tube?" "I don't know." "Do you want a feeding tube?" "I don't know." It's not because they're being stubborn or resistant. It's maybe because they have FTD and they simply can't make a decision. So the medical decisions someone needs to make with ALS are ventilation or not ventilation. Because the diaphragm will eventually fail, that will lead to death. If you opt to then go on a ventilator, which means having a tracheostomy tube placed in your throat and being hooked up to a ventilator for the rest of your life, there are about 5 to 10% of the United States of people with ALS that opt to live on a ventilator. So you are, in essence, living on life support. Medical insurance does not cover nursing. Medicare doesn't cover nursing care at home. Even though we do have some folks with medical insurance that have coverage for nursing when someone's on a vent, we can't pay the nurses to cover them. So you might live in an area where there's simply no ventilator-trained nurses that can work in your home. Ventilation means a change in body image because you do have this tracheostomy in your throat. and you do have a lot of strangers in your home because somebody on a ventilator needs 24/7 care. You can never, ever leave that person alone. The other decision is a feeding tube or not, often called a peg tube. Where to live, because as you will see with some of my future slides, many houses are not handicapped accessible. Who will be the caregiver? And I have to tell you, after my years of experience, do not assume that your spouse will take on that role. Financial costs. There is obviously, if you are working, there's a lack of income because you can no longer work if the disease impairs your body too much or your mind. And then if you stop working and you are carrying medical insurance, lack of that medical insurance, but this would obviously not impact somebody if they enrolled in the VA system, if they were a veteran. Transportation, which we're going to cover co-pays if you're only relying on medical insurance. And know that the average cost of keeping somebody alive on a ventilator is over $400,000 a year. And that's including all the equipment, the nursing, et cetera. So durable medical equipment needs for people with ALS. Durable medical equipment, the acronym is DME. And Medicare defines DME as iron lungs. Yes, they still use that terminology. Oxygen nebulizers, CPAPs, which are non-invasive ventilators that are used for people with apnea, but for our folks with ALS, I've mentioned BiPAP and trilogies, power operating vehicles, and a wheelchair, et cetera. But this is what we're going to talk about, DME needs for people with ALS. So we will often add, people will say a seat lift chair, one of the recliners that will help you stand up. So we have a lot of folks that request that, and I can only attest to Medicare will only cover the mechanism but not the chair. And maybe someone from the VA can answer this question, but as far as I know, that is not a covered item under Veterans Administration. Transfer boards and pivot discs, transfer boards to help somebody move, for example, from a bed into a wheelchair. It's just a long board that you slide the person over. And then once a person can't sustain their upper body strength anymore, or they can't independently stand, then you're going to need some form of transfer lift. A Hoyer lift. Hoyer is it's like Kleenex, you know. It's the generic, or not the generic, it's the name brand, but all it means is that it's an automated lift or a ceiling lift. Now, the ceiling lifts go into the joists on the ceiling, or they have these poles here. The Hoyer lift does not, and it is just a standalone unit. And so we will, excuse me, let me go back. We would use one of these lift systems, the Hoyer or the ceiling, to transfer the person from a bed into a wheelchair, or vice versa, the wheelchair into a bed. Most people do not use lifts when they're going into a bathroom if their bathroom is accessible. They will use a shower chair, which I'm sorry, I don't know if I have a picture of. Let me just go ahead. No, I don't have exact picture of, but it looks like this chair on this bottom. So this is just a shower chair, which is a chair, I hope you can see it, that has a cutout. So once you slide this chair back on the bottom, for example, you would bring this chair into the bedroom, transfer a person with ALS onto this chair, and then move this chair into the bathroom where you could use this sliding tub transfer system to get them into a tub. Or because there's this cutout, you can wheel this right over a toilet and have them toileting themselves, and then you can help them clean themselves up if you want, and then move them into the tub transfer system, or just take this shower chair into a shower or a bathtub. So there are different types of tub transfer systems. This is the most simple one, just a bench outside that has these legs outside for stability. Put the person with ALS here and you slide them over. For more people that are advanced, that don't have the upper body strength to keep themselves upright anymore, you would use this kind of tub transfer system. And then shower assistance. You want, if you're building a shower or converting your shower, you want a shower that's flat to the ground, that does not have a lip. Okay? You do not want one of these because you can't get a wheelchair in here, and you would still have to have the individual with ALS walk into this. So this is not what you want, this kind of lip. Okay? You want something flush to the ground like this. Okay? And you don't necessarily have to build this shower. There are companies that will come out, like a bath fitter type of company that will take your existing shower and put in a standing shower. Okay, but you always want to make sure that you can roll that shower chair, this one, into the shower, and then you can shower someone as they're seated. You don't have to transfer them again. This shower chair, I know it's hard to see, but it's made of mesh, so the water will go through it, so you actually shower them in the shower chair. And so you don't have to put them in any other seat in the bathroom like this woman. That's just an example of her sitting there, so you could get the idea of what the shower looks like. For those people who cannot modify their bathroom, or who opt to live on the first floor and there is no bathroom, there is a foldable shower called a faucet. And as you can see, this gentleman's using outside, but basically most people use it inside, and it is hooked up to a kitchen sink or any other type of sink. And there's a hose that goes into the faucet and a pump behind here that you can't see, and a hose that goes out. So the water comes in through the kitchen sink, gets pumped in, comes out through the handle here that this gentleman's holding, and then it's pumped back out into the sink. And once this individual is done showering, this whole thing fills up. And you don't have to take a shower every day if you don't want to, so you could fold this up and get it out every few days. But it at least gives the individual an option to shower if they have bathrooms that cannot be converted. Or again, if they're living on the first floor or the second floor and there's no access to a bathroom. I just want to mention hospital beds. We get a lot of people who ask us, oh, can I get a Craftmatic? The problem with the Craftmatics is that they don't sit high off of the floor like a hospital bed. And when I mentioned that Hoyer lifts have bars that have to get underneath the hospital table, or hospital bed, excuse me, and then there's a sling and the person gets moved out of the hospital bed. Standard beds do not have this empty space, so you can't get a lift underneath it. So that's why we recommend hospital beds. For stair glides for folks with ALS, stair glides are only useful for someone with ALS as long as they have trunk support. Once they lose trunk support, they are not safe, and we advise people not to use them anymore, because it's not only unsafe for the person with ALS that they can tip over, it is unsafe for the caregiver who's trying to keep them upright and could essentially fall on the steps from trying to keep someone upright. So, there's stair glides that just go up and down a straight staircase, or there are ones that will curve around a staircase, as you can see here. This is an interior lift that obviously you can see instead of having to transfer on to the stair glide seat, which is just a traditional seat like this woman is sitting on. Instead, you actually take your wheelchair up and down the steps totally, so you never have to transfer out of your wheelchair. And although this is pictured as a manual wheelchair, they do have heavy-duty ones that can actually take a power wheelchair up and down the steps. Now, obviously, you need a wider staircase than you do here, okay? But that is part of the decision-making process of when I'm anticipating future needs. Am I going to get a regular stair glide that can only be used until my loved one doesn't have trunk support anymore? And then what do? Do we move to the first floor? Does he live on the second floor? Or instead, do you get this from the beginning and you don't have to worry about it? These are all the decisions that folks with ALS and their families are making on a daily basis. So in terms of wheelchairs, we do not recommend scooters for people with ALS. This is not recommended. As you can see, there is no trunk support here, so if somebody can't hold themselves upright, they're going to tip right over on here. And also, if the person's hands are weak, they're not going to be able to drive. Now, that being said, if somebody really wants a scooter, you can rent them. You do not have to buy them outright. Or some folks will get it from their medical insurance. Now, this has nothing to do with the VA. I'm strictly talking about Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. Or if you had private insurance, Aetna, Blue Cross. But those insurances will only pay for what they call one power-operated vehicle. So if you get a scooter, you're never going to get a high-end power wheelchair from medical insurance. That being said, scooters have, unfortunately, because ALS is a progressive disease and we know it's going to continue to progress, they have a short lifespan with somebody with ALS. So that's why we don't say buy it outright, perhaps rent it instead. Because inevitably, if you start getting weaker and you can't sit on this scooter or you can't drive it, you are unfortunately going to need a power wheelchair at that point. And it's important to know that power wheelchairs, even through the VA, take 6, 8 weeks. Through medical insurance, it can take 5 months. So it's not something that you can say, oh, my loved one fell again, we need the power wheelchair tomorrow. That's not the way it works through any type of system. You have to get measured, it has to be ordered, and then it has to be delivered. So even though the person might not be at that point where I have to use it 8 hours a day, it would be beneficial to start earlier, especially if you're a veteran, and get it well before the person is falling like 4 times a day. Okay, so you would get a power wheelchair that would have specific features. Power wheelchairs for people with ALS have what's called a tilt in space function. What that means is that the person with ALS sits in the same position, but the wheelchair tilts back anywhere from 45 to 55 degrees in order to alleviate the pressure on the buttocks and move pressure to the back. So you want people to be able to weight shift at least twice an hour so that they don't get bed sores. And then this person is actually in a wheelchair that has a full recline, which most of our wheelchairs also do. So they'll come with something, they come with a tilt in space and they come with recline. And then the feet can move up, and this person could actually be laying flat almost. And some of our folks find that they like to sleep in their wheelchair. But wheelchairs are more than just transportation. We use them for weight shifting. I can't stress enough how important weight shifting is because you do not want to get a bed sore on your buttocks or anywhere else on you because that is caused by not being able to shift your weight. So that's why using tilt in space and or recline is crucial. Also, for people with ALS, we always tell them it is a disease that causes fatigue. We want you to conserve your energy. So if walking from point A to B is tiring to you or you're out of breath, using a wheelchair can save your energy. Just things to consider if somebody is going to be using a wheelchair in your home. Are your exit and your entrance and your exit, is there a ramp or stairs, which we've already talked about? And if you opt not to use a stair glide or a lift, like the wheelchair lift that I showed earlier, are you going to build an elevator in your home? The general layout of your home. We tell people to lift up your throw rugs, especially if somebody actually is using a walker to get around. You should not have throw rugs if somebody is trying to walk and use a walker. That is a tripping hazard. And then for wheelchairs, you could have throw rugs down, but they can get stuck and then start bunching underneath the wheelchair, and then it could burn the motor out. So we do recommend that throw rugs come up at all times in a home with somebody with ALS. The doorway width, in order to get a wheelchair through a doorway, is 32 inches or more. Access to the sink, if somebody wanted access, many of our folks don't care about that. Access to your tub, your shower, your commode. Do they want access to the kitchen? Some people want it. Some people say it's not important. And then what type of floor surface? As I mentioned, the throw rugs. The other impediment for a wheelchair could be a heavy shag carpet. So if you have a heavy shag carpet, maybe putting down plastic, the plastic runners that the individual can use to guide their wheelchair on instead of trying to put it on a heavy-duty shag carpet. The features that I mentioned in a power wheelchair for folks with ALS are the tilt and space, the recline, the elevating legs, these legs that will go up, the electronics, and there are various electronics for people with ALS. Obviously, this one's a joystick that would be operated by either the right or the left hand. If somebody can't operate that, then there's, this is a chin joystick. This gentleman is driving his wheelchair through his chin. And then this person is driving their wheelchair through what's called a head array. So there are sensors here. When they press gently back on this part, it goes forward. When they press gently here, it goes right and it goes left. So you are actually driving the wheelchair through minute head movement. So just because somebody doesn't have hand function doesn't mean that they can't operate their power wheelchair. And even if they're not driving it, like some folks will go, well, driving is not the most important thing, but I want access so that I can weight shift, so I can operate my tilt and space. So you can operate your tilt and space with this or with this too, okay? Many of our folks like seat elevators for their wheelchair. What the seat elevator does is it takes the wheelchair, as you can see, and puts it up about sometimes up to 28, 30 inches so that you can actually reach, and I'm putting this in air quote, bar height, so that you can actually have social interaction. You can be eye to eye with someone. And we've had several teachers who want to do this so that they can reach a chalkboard or a whiteboard now. And as you can see with the power elevated seat, you can still do the tilt and space, okay? This really comes in handy, although because I elongated the picture, it looks a lot higher than it truly is. Excuse me. But we have seat elevators are really handy for especially men who have ALS that are tall and their caregiver and or spouse is small, you know, and this way the caregiver can get the individual almost to a standing position and then just gently bring them forward. So we have a lot of people who use this based on size and ratio of the person with ALS and the caregiver. For ramping one's home, you have choices of wood or steel, aluminum ramp. Wood is a permanent fixture in your home. Steel and aluminum can easily be removed. And you can also, with steel aluminum ramps, rent, lease, or purchase them. The steel aluminum ramps do not require permits, but wood does. So we always recommend you check with your local government office anyway. But it is important to know not every house can be ramped. And why I put this out there is that many of our folks have to make these decisions about whether or not they can stay in their home with ALS. 90% of homes in this country were not based on accessibility, okay? So as you can see, there would be no way to ramp this home. And some of the discussions that have to be made are, if I want to stay in this home, what do we have to do to modify it, or do we end up having to move? It is a hard conversation to have, but it's important to have. And it's important to have early enough where you would, if you opted to move, have time to sell your home, find an accessible place to live, or find another place to live, and make it accessible. So here are some different ramps, wooden ramps here, and this is a steel ramp, and this is actually made of mesh, so that hopefully if snow happens, some of the snow will come through the mesh. I mean, obviously you're going to have to shovel if you live in a snow area, all of these ramps, but this one has mesh. It's hopefully, you know, some of the snow goes through it. This is an aluminum ramp, and as you can see, they all have bars for safety and just a different material. Now this I just put in here is a threshold ramp. They come in various sizes, but this is actually a foldable ramp, so this one folds over on that, and as you can see, there's a handle here. So you could actually bring this type of ramp to a neighbor's home if you were trying to get your wheelchair in, if they only had a 1 or 2 steps, or you know, have this to carry to go to other places that are not ramped. If your home cannot accommodate a ramp, there are stair lifts for the outside. As you can see, many different forms, but the one thing that you have to understand is that they all sit on a concrete block, as you can see here. And what they do is you back the wheelchair into the lift. This lift comes up, and the whole thing lifts up to the second floor, and then you just slide your wheelchair out. There are stair lifts for both outside and inside accommodation. Okay. And also inside, I mentioned an elevator. That's also an option, like a standard elevator. They come in many shapes and sizes, but you can put an elevator in your home too. In terms of transportation, can the individual still safely transfer into a car? So as you can see here, this gentleman is helping this woman into a car, and you probably can't see it, but she has something around her called a gate belt, and he has his hands in the gate belt. And in order for her and him to safely make this transfer, she has to be able to assist somewhat in the transfer, whether or not that means that she can keep her trunk supported, or hopefully she can move her feet a little bit and move her hips a little bit in order to get into the wheelchair or into the car. And then, because this is a manual wheelchair, it folds up and could go into the trunk of the car. Once someone cannot assist in the transfer of themselves, a person with ALS, into the car, then they are no longer safe for the caregiver to put them into the car. And then we have to look at accessible transportation, which would be handicapped accessible van. And an accessible van can be used to transport a person in a wheelchair, both power and or manual, and you don't ever have to get them out of the chair. So there are 2 different types of accessible vehicles. There are the minivans, as you can see here, and then this is a full-size van. And the difference also between the full-size and the minivan is the lift system. So the minivans have just an automatic or a manual ramp. As you can see, it's not a long ramp, and you just either push the person in on the wheelchair, or they take their power operated wheelchair and they drive themselves in. With the minivan, what ends up happening is you can buy a standard minivan and then you take it to a conversion company and they will convert it for handicapped accessibility. Or you can go to a conversion company and just buy the whole thing outright. If you were looking for an accessible vehicle, and I'm sorry I forgot to put this on here, there is a great website called disableddealer.com. And they divide the country up into 4 quadrants. And so I'm in the Philadelphia area. I would get the Philadelphia, Boston, New York version. And if I was looking for an accessible van, disabled dealer would help me find it in my area, okay? Or you can just look on Google and say accessible vans and put in your zip code, okay? And they'll give you places that you can go. But if you, for example, just bought a Ford minivan and you wanted it converted, you take it to the conversion company, and basically what they do is they cut the entire bottom off and lower the chassis. So you can see here, handicapped accessible vehicles sit much lower to the ground. And the reason they do that is because they want to give you more of a height ratio to get your wheelchair in there. Some people will opt to actually shear off the roof and put one of these on top of the minivan. That's great, except then you're not going to fit into an underground parking garage, which is why a lot of people who live in urban areas like the minivan. You cannot park this in an underground parking garage. You will shear the top right off. So if you know that you live or travel in an urban city and you need to find a garage in order to house your vehicle, you're going to need a minivan. And at least I can say this for my city of Philadelphia, we are losing a lot of our exterior parking lots. So if I was driving this, I would be driving around for a long time trying to find an exterior parking lot, because now we're getting more and more garages built. So you have to think about these things. Where am I driving? What kind of climate am I driving in? What is the size of the person who's driving me? Okay, because if you have a really small person driving, it's really hard to get the seat up, and for a very tiny, petite woman to drive this type of vehicle. Much easier for the minivan. So just something to think about when you're considering vans. And I am a communication specialist. This is my area, so I just want to talk to you about communication issues for people with ALS. We know statistically that 50% of people with ALS will become speech impaired. That's called dysarthria. And dysarthria can either be mild, moderate, or severe, but really it's slurred speech. 25% of people with ALS will have anarthria, which is the inability to produce any sound. And then 25% will be understood throughout the course of the illness. So if you add the top two numbers together, you're getting 75% or more people who need some form of communication assistance when they have this disease. We don't know what level of intervention that communication will be, but there are ideas that I hope you can walk away with today to know how to communicate with your loved one should communication become an issue. And there's no one right answer in terms of what people ask me all the time. Well, what do other people do? It depends. But the most important thing I hope you could take away about communication in ALS is that every person with ALS uses multiple modalities of communication. They are not using the same communication method when they are sitting on the toilet as they are when they are in the dining room or on the deck outside or on the front porch. So you have to be prepared and to have different communication systems depending on what environment that you are in. Okay, so before we start talking about electronic communications, I just wanted to put a note or a slide in here about voice banking and message banking. This is something that people would need to do at the beginning of the illness because you need a clear and articulate voice. The idea behind voice banking is that you download the software from Model Talker and you repeat about 1,800 phrases from Model Talker. It takes about 20 hours to do. So you do this over a course of days or weeks. You can't do this in one sitting, okay? And the idea behind Model Talker is that should you ever need a communication device or a computer to act as your voice because you can no longer speak. The voice that will be coming out of that computer or speech generating device will be your own voice. So you have banked your voice, and whatever you type into the machine, you know, it's very hot out today, would come out in as close to my voice because it is my voice, but it still is being run through a synthesizer. So it's not 100% your voice. But message banking would be 100% your voice. What message banking is using technology, your smartphone, a MP3 player, or just your computer. And what you do is you record messages. I love you. You can record messages for your cat or your dog. Come here, Buster. No, don't do that. So this is your authentic voice that's being captured in an MP3 or a WAV file. And then you just upload it into your device, whatever you're using, your computer, your speech generating device, and the message would come out in your voice. The difference is with Model Talker, whatever you type into it will come out in your voice. With message banking, it's only the certain things that you said. So, you know, you can't type into a message banked phrase and expect it to say something different, okay? So I have a whole handout on this, should you want it, and my email is at the end of this presentation. But I just want to mention it because this is a big movement within the ALS community right now. There are amplification for people who have low vocal volume. So we have people with ALS who talk like this because they just simply don't have the breath support, but they can still talk and speak fine. So we recommend an amplifier for them so that they don't have to push as hard to get their voice out. But then for those that are really having problems speaking, they have significant slurred speech, we have various options for communication. Rapid access, you have high tech, and sort of in the mainstream middle, okay? And the most important thing, I've said this before, but this is the most important thing that I would like everyone to walk away with today is that with your loved one, you always need to establish a yes, no, maybe system, okay? It's not just yes and no, because if the caregiver or whoever's speaking to the person with ALS has asked the question wrong, you're forcing them to answer because you're giving them a yes and no. So it always should be yes, no, maybe. And I tell people, you know, put it on the wall. You know, John says yes, no, maybe, bye. Because then any stranger could walk in, a first responder could walk in and know how to communicate with this person with ALS by doing the yes, no, maybe. Some people like eye blinks. I'm not a fan so much because sometimes I miss the blink, so I'll ask people, you know, look to the right for yes, to the left for no, and look up to the ceiling for maybe. Whatever is going to work for you, okay? These are various letterboards here, which I provide free of charge from the National ALS Association. This is a laser pointer that this gentleman is using on his eyeglasses in conjunction with a letterboard. A boogie board, which is an LCD board that you can buy on Amazon. And basically when you write or draw and you press this button, it goes away. Okay. So many ideas for what I call quick and easy communication. For people that want something electronic, a lot of our folks are using iPads, tablets, Android tablets, etc. And you can get an application for them for free or low cost. You do not need to spend $119 unless there is no other option. So, you know, try some free things first. They work on smartphones. They work on tablets. We have, this is an app. I love this app. It's called FlipWriter. Now, this is only available on the iPad, but it enables you to have a private conversation with somebody. Because, say, I'm the typist here, and I had somebody sitting across from me at a restaurant table, they can see what I'm typing here, and I don't have to turn the iPad around or anything. They can just see it because it's almost like a mirror image, okay? So there is a free version, that's this one, but if you wanted it to speak out loud, it's $25. But you don't necessarily need the speech if that's not what you want. And there are many ways of accessing the iPad. So I would encourage people to, if they're working on the iPad and you are having difficulty and you're in the VA system, to reach out to the speech pathology department, and they can help you not only find a good app, but they can help you find access to your iPad, because all the iPads now have built-in what's called switch access, and so your speech pathologist or your occupational therapy department can work with you. If you can't use your hands, you can still use your iPad. And basically, in the iPad, it's called switch access. And a switch is something that you put near a muscle movement on the body that tells the device to do something. The easiest example I can give you is a joystick on the computer. The joystick, when you move it, it sends a current to the engine of the power wheelchair to do something, left, right, up, forward, back. Same with the switch. It sends a current to the iPad to do something, and it scans. So it goes row, row, row. You hit your switch, come. You hit your switch until it comes to the letter or the icon that you want. So just because someone can't use their hands does not mean that they cannot use a device. And then in order for them to use it, it should be mounted on the wheelchair. This is also something that the speech therapy department can work with you on getting an appropriate mount. Because you don't want your device, over your lap, it can slide right off, or it's not easy to see. So there are mounts that you can work with tablets. And these are these are the Android tablets that you can see here, okay? And again, the Android are switch access. The Androids also have what's called eye gaze access, and that's this bar here. And we're going to talk about that briefly in a moment. Some of our folks are using laptops. You can use your own laptop and download, download software, which is free, like Ventriloquist. You can download this on a Windows environment, or actually it works on my Mac. It's free. You download it into your laptop, and you can be typing away in 5 minutes, and this is what it looks like. You can say phrases, you can type things out here, and it'll say it all in a synthesized voice, and this is free. So this is a great way to help your loved one maybe transition into using a communication device. Oh, let's just download Ventriloquist for a second and see if you like it, okay? And it's free. And you can use your existing computer to do it. Some folks want a high-tech communication device, and these are also provided by the speech therapy department at your local VA. And this is ordered through your speech pathology department. And these are machines that obviously either can be symbol-based or can be alphabet-based, and they will type out whatever you type into them. And a lot of our folks are using these, and eventually what they will often do is use an iPad, an Android, until they lose their hand function, and then they'll transition into one of these high-tech devices. And you can access them, like this is all eye gaze technology. So the basis behind eye gaze technology is right here. There's a camera, and this gentleman is looking at the camera, and the camera is watching his retina. So as he moves around the screen, so go down here, and he dwells on the letter A, it will type A up here. And then he moves his eyes down to N, and he dwells on N and you set the time, however long he wants to dwell on N, and it types N. And so these are called eye gaze communication devices. And I just want to also tell people the imperative of having a call bell system both in and out of the house. So for example, if the person with ALS is laying in bed and their caregiver is in the kitchen or in the living room, you want that person to have a call bell system in place And for people who have hand function, that could be a remote door chime. And for people who don't have hand function, there's something called an easy call bell and alarm that is switch activated. You can put it near their head or their chin, wherever they have muscle movement, and it'll emit this high-pitched beep until that person lets go of the bell. And for the outside of the home, you know, if your caregiver is working and you're leaving your loved one for, you know, a few minutes, an hour a day, hours a day, make sure they have the ability to call for help, and that is usually the iFallen and can't get up system, the lifeline system. And you can activate the lifeline system by your hand, your wrist, your ankle. And if you can't use your hands or your feet, there are switch adaptable iFallen and can't get up systems. So just because somebody doesn't have hand function doesn't mean they can't use the emergency alarm. So I just want to, the last two slides I really have are just talking about the psychological issues of ALS. And obviously with the disease itself, anticipatory grief was already mentioned, so that's right here. But it is like the stages of bereavement. And not only are people going through this with ALS, but they're going through this when it comes to assistive technology. For example, the wheelchair. I don't need the wheelchair, I'm fine. But Dad, you're falling every day, 3 times a day. Nope, I'm fine. That's the denial. And then, why are you telling me this? They're going to get angry with you. And then they're going to bargain with you. And then they're going to go through depression and then move into acceptance. The unfortunate part of this is that if they're falling all the time during this denial and lethargy, they might really hurt themselves. You know, fracture a skull or a hip. But it is part of the process. The unfortunate part is this is the psychological process, but meanwhile, physically, the disease is still progressing every day. So sometimes the psychological component doesn't keep up with the physical component, and the physical happens much quicker than the psychological component because people are upset about not only the disease, but the assistive technology interventions that they have to use because of the lack of them being able to do something. You know, so they're going to experience, you know, the grief, coping with the loss, and I'm going to use, again, the wheelchair, coping with the loss of walking, of independence, and they're going to feel inadequate. You know, my loved one has to do everything. Mary just mentioned about, you know, brushing teeth. That's what they're anticipating. The person with ALS is going to be angry about that. And so we go through this whole coping process along with the emotions, and hopefully we, the family, the person with ALS can make interventions as appropriate. But sometimes, as I said, the disease happens quicker than we can either get the interventions or that the person is just not ready for them yet. And I just want everyone to walk away with that's normal. It is normal. It's not ideal, but it's the whole psychosocial component has to happen before anybody can accept an intervention, whether or not it's a wheelchair, a walker, a ramp, or anything else. So there are many resources on YouTube that you can go through. These are my references for my presentation, and as I said, I will be happy to answer any questions that you have further. I know that this is being recorded and a link will be provided to you, but if you have further questions, if you have a problem or you want to send me a picture, here's my bathroom, tell me what you think. I'm happy to help. And with that, I will turn it over to Brian. I'm sorry I went a little over.
No worries. Thank you so much, Mary and Alyssa, for your amazing and inspiring presentations. We now have a few minutes for some questions that you submitted to us through the chat feature. But remember, if you don't If your questions weren't answered, please send us an email to militarycaregiver@easterseals.com. So the first question comes from a caregiver. It says, is the cognitive impairment noticed before diagnosis, or is that more of a result of the ALS process?
I will tell you from the narrative that I've heard, sometimes it's the first symptom. So there's no physical symptoms, but we've had several caregivers say there was something cognitively wrong before anything else appeared. So it could be the initial onset of ALS with no other symptoms.
Mary, would you like to share a bit about the early onset of your husband and your experience?
Sure. So with Tom, his biggest symptoms early on was vesiculation and cramping. And so the vesiculations are, the best way to describe them if you've never really seen them before is it's like twitching, but it's like sort of high intensity twitching. And you can kind of see rumble underneath their skin. And then sometimes after that is cramping. So with Tom, we saw that a lot on his left side and in his chest area. And then he started atrophying a little bit. He had some muscle wasting.
Thank you. And so this question goes to Michelle, and it seems like everyone seems to kind of be asking around this. So what are the sort of devices that are covered by the VA, or can you shine some light as to what is the process for accessing assistance with devices through the VA?
Thank you, Brian. First of all, I would definitely encourage the caregiver to contact the CSC to have them evaluate it. And if they're not involved in their, the caregiver program, to, really get involved with their social worker at the VA, because there are resources that I had put in the chat box.
Great.
They have
Thank
to
you.
be assessed. There's just not a blanket, this is what they're going to get.
Thank you, Michelle. And unfortunately, we have run a little bit on time, past the time. If we were not able to address your questions today, please send us an email to militarycaregiver@easterseals.com, and we'll be sure to get back to you. All those who registered for this webinar will receive a very brief follow-up online satisfaction survey. We hope that you're able to take a few moments to share your feedback with us, as it is greatly appreciated. Lastly, I'd like to let everyone know that within 2 weeks, you can find the recording and transcription of today's webinars along with the presentation at easterseals.com/care webinar, along with many other valuable resources. Thank you again to our presenters, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, and to the many caregivers who participated in today's forum. Have a great afternoon, everyone.